Hello, folks. This is Robert North again. This is lesson 4. We're going to be talking about the Gospel of Thomas, which, in my judgment, is one of the most remarkable books ever composed. Remarkable because of the wisdom it contains, because of the incredible organization of the wisdom poems that it contains, and the fact that because that I think I have proven that it was composed by Jesus, obviously before he died. It is the only way to understand the way of Jesus. You cannot understand it by reading the New Testament. The New Testament makes Jesus into a founder of a religion, and he did not. He was leading people out of religion, as I've said. Now, in the end of lesson 3, we talked about Jesus in Capernaum composing his sayings, parables, and poems, reciting them to people passing through. Through these people who memorized them, they were spreading throughout the Roman Empire, but particularly in Palestine. At a certain point, Jesus knew that people were memorizing his poems, but that they were not following the way. The way, as you go through these lessons, you're going to find is a different way to think. It's counterintuitive. It's based on principles that are not in our society. Our worldwide culture is religious. Everyone is a religion. Religion is in our DNA. Now, you'll begin to understand what I mean by that as you go through these lessons. The logic that we use is religious. If you say to somebody, good luck, that's a religious statement. Now, Jesus probably, it's my belief, realized that people were memorizing his poems, but they were not actually living them. They needed him to interpret the metaphors. The metaphors are difficult to understand if you only have one poem. You have to have 2 or 3 poems and see them in parallel, and then one metaphor, words in one poem explain the metaphor in another poem. When I laid out the Gospel of Thomas in that manner, I was able to determine the meaning of his metaphors. So at a certain point, he got frustrated that people were not living the way, and he decided to go on the road with a group of disciples who also, in my opinion, were not living the way, even though they were living in Capernaum. It is very difficult for people to leave religion and think in an entirely different way. Very difficult. We build our lives around blind belief. We build our lives around the dogma that's been handed down to us from our parents, from our traditions, from in our textbooks. And to leave all of that and to take on a new way of thinking and a new way of acting is very difficult. And the disciples around Jesus were raised to be very strict Jews. And so consequently, they were fundamentalists, and for them to leave that strict orientation and take on the way of Jesus and the way of Buddha and Abraham and Eve, Jesus must have been frustrated that as much as he tried to explain it to them and tried to model it, they didn't quite get it. We know that later, that after he died, we could see that they were confused. So Jesus went on the road, and he would stop in communities and recite key poems and answer people's questions, and probably put on many workshops helping people to begin to integrate, to leave religion and live the way. He did that for about 2.5 years, maybe 2.25, maybe about 30 months. At that point, Herod the king beheaded John the Baptist, who was a friend of Jesus. Now, John the Baptist was preaching religion. But he was using the religion to condemn King Herod. At some point, Jesus realized, okay, they've gone ahead and they've killed John the Baptist against the consensus of the people who loved John. Therefore, the next target is going to be me, because I am showing people how to leave not only religion, but leave any controlling authority over people, how people make personal decisions about their lives. So the Jewish clerics were after him. They probably were going to the Roman authorities and saying that Jesus was undercutting Rome. And so Jesus, after being out for about 30 months, decided to go into hiding. He went first for about 3 months up to Caesarea, which you can see here on this map. I believe that Jesus knew that he was going to be murdered, that there was no way for him to escape Consequently, up in Caesarea, he probably, I think, got the idea that he'd better put all of his core sayings, parables, and poems in a book, in a way, organized in a way that people could understand the metaphors, that people could understand the entire way. In one place, people could memorize the book and in their heads, or if it was scribed, they could begin to understand how to live like he envisioned. After 3 months, for some reason, he went south, and we look on this map, and you'll see the city of Pella in Jordan. That city exists today. Jesus went up a canyon near Pella and lived for 6 months. I believe that up that canyon, he finished the composition of the Gospel of Thomas. In the first sentence of the Gospel, it says, "These are the words of Jesus." In other words, this is his book. In the second sentence, it says that he dictated to his disciple Thomas. The document that we can possess today, in the margin, a scribe wrote Gospel of Thomas. Now, he may have done that in order to hide the author so that he wouldn't be killed, or we just don't know why he wrote it. But the Gospel certainly was never called the Gospel of Jesus or the Gospel of Thomas. It was just a gospel originally. After 6 months up the canyon, Jesus went to Jerusalem. I think he was hoping that the people there was to be such a mob of people who embraced his poems that the authorities would not dare to touch him. But they did. They came to him in the night, grabbed him out of the sight of most of the people, put him on trial, and crucified him. It was all staged. It was assassination. Now, what happened to the Gospel of Thomas after that? Well, remember that this is an alternate way to live, and that anybody with this gospel would be killed. This was a very dangerous time. So Thomas, we have no record of Thomas having gone to Jerusalem. My hunch is that he had the only copy of the gospel up in the canyon near Pella. After Jesus died, Mary Magdalene, who was an associate of Jesus, would have known that she was in danger and probably returned to that location. Then she and Thomas knew that eventually the authorities are going to find out where they were, and so they better leave. I think they went north to Damascus and then north further. People have theorized that Mary Magdalene lived up north of Damascus, and it's only a theory. When they got to Damascus, or a city like that, Thomas would have made more copies. They would probably have hired other people to copy the Gospel of Thomas. Then they would have had to be very careful about who they showed it to. And so it was hidden. Eventually, a copy or copies got to Egypt. Now, just how and when, we don't know. The Roman Catholic Church expanded incredibly fast. By the beginning of the 4th century, by 325, there were bishops in various provinces of the Roman Empire. Now that's, in 300 years, that's a huge expansion. And under those bishops were priests, and there was churches, and they were all fighting against one heresy after another, and a heresy was a different version of Jesus' message. But the Catholic Church was teaching primarily out of the Gospel of Paul, not the Gospel of Jesus. About 312, Constantine, the Roman Emperor, decided that he was going to consolidate the Roman Empire around the Catholic Church. A very smart move, because the Catholic Church was highly organized. He could send out messages to all the bishops could send it to the churches could then deliver in sermons the message to the people. It was kind of his way of communicating and promulgating his laws. So in 325, or actually in 324, he called together all these bishops to Nicaea to promulgate once and for all the nature of the Roman Catholic Church and the nature of Christianity. All did not show up. Less than half of them did. And they met and they drew up the beginning of canon law, rules that Catholics were to follow. They also discussed one of the major controversies was the nature of Jesus. Was he really the Son of God? What was the relationship between Jesus and the Father? That was a major topic of discussion. What wasn't a topic of discussion were all of Jesus' poems, sayings, and parables. That was not on the agenda. They were not on the agenda. Jesus was not on the agenda. They also drew up the fundamental creed for Christians. And here it is. You can see it. It's the Nicene Creed of 325. We believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. Jesus would never, ever want everybody to believe the same thing. His message, as you're going to see, is to teach people how to discover their own answers. So what they believe today will change tomorrow as they experience tomorrow. After Nicaea, the bishops all went back to their various provinces. And in the province of Egypt, a bishop called Athanasius sent out a letter to all the churches and all the monasteries, telling them to destroy any document that disagreed with the conclusions in the Council of Nicaea. Now here's a map of Egypt, of part of Egypt. You can see up the Nile Valley a place called Nag Hammadi. Now let me show you. You'll see a picture of. You see a picture now of camels at a cliff area. Those were Bedouin farmers who were out there digging soil, rich soil that was in those cliff areas. This next slide shows you a huge vase. It's much bigger. This vase is huge. And it's like the one that was discovered buried by these farmers in the cliff. The next slide here shows books wrapped in leather that were discovered in the vase. This discovery occurred in 1945. The gospel is in Coptic, which is an ancient Egyptian language. It's still used today, but it's very transformed. Now, the translations of the gospel happened, were published in about 1970, and so if you haven't heard about it, it's because it's a rather recent discovery. When I began to study this in 1998, scholars found that these sayings in the Gospel of Thomas were random. Further, they doubted that Jesus composed them, even though about half of them can be found in some form in the New Testament. I, at that point, had come a great way to discovering what I call Semitic parallelism, which is in this book, which I've explained before. Now, when I applied Semitic parallelism to the Gospel of Thomas, within 6 months saw this. This is you see the Gospel of Thomas, and you see that the chapters are arranged in an arch. There's 21 chapters. Very clearly, they're easy to discern if you know Semitic parallelism. Otherwise, it does look like a random arrangement. Not only is the gospel arranged in 21 chapters, it is arranged in such a way that you can read up to the top to the keystone chapter and then down to the end. But you're also supposed to be, at the same time, be reading horizontally. Chapter 1 is parallel and explained by chapter 21. Chapter 2 is parallel to and explained by chapter 20, and so forth. So the organization is very intricate, even at this first level. Now let me show you an example of chapter 21. In 21, you see 9 poems, wisdom poems. They're also arranged in an arch. You can read up to the keystone poem 5 and down to 9. You can also read poem 1 and then poem 9. Poem 9 explains poem 1. Poem 1 explains poem 9. Poem 2 explains poem 8. 8 explains poem 2. Now that's very intricate. So you've got an arch arrangement of chapters. In many of the chapters, you have an arch arrangement of poems, or if they're not arranged in an arch, they're arranged in 2 parallel columns. Now, then, let me show you the arrangement of chapter 21, poem 2. This is a single poem. It consists of 7 stanzas. The 7 stanzas are arranged in an arch. So stanza 1 is explained by stanza 7. 7 explains stanza 1. 2 is parallel to 6, 3 is parallel to 5. Now, what we've got here is 3 levels of organization. A level of, the poems are organized in an arch or in 2 parallel columns. The chapters, the poems within a chapter are arranged in an arch or 2 parallel columns. And the whole book is arranged in an arch of 21 chapters. So here, again, is the arrangement, is the Gospel of Thomas as we see it arranged in 21 chapters in an arch. I believe that the author of this, I've shown in the appendix of my translation, had to have been Jesus. The author, this is such a complex arrangement, only the author who knew the meaning of the metaphors, who knew how to arrange the poems, could possibly have done this. And we know that Jesus was the author of at least half of them, and it's logical that he's the author of all of them, because the same metaphors are used all the way through the gospel. The gospel is so tightly organized that you can't imagine other material being added to it from other authors. But there are 13 other arguments that I make to show that Jesus composed the Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas explains Jesus' way, which is the way of Buddha, the way of Abraham, and the way of Eve. It does it beautifully. I think that this gospel is a new form of literature. I don't know of any other book that is organized as intricately as this one and conveys the kind of wisdom that this one does. That's the end of lesson 4, folks. I hope I withheld my excitement sufficiently. I think the Gospel of Thomas is a magnificent, magnificent work of art and wisdom. I hope that you go to the website, 7771.org, and read part of the Gospel of Thomas. Skip through it. You can read up to 40% of the Gospel right on the website. See how the Gospel is laid out. See how ingeniously he matched one poem on one side with a poem on the other side. You can see also how I give my definition of the metaphors. I did that by studying how the words were used throughout the gospel. Watch for the enormous amount of wisdom, and also watch to see that he is not teaching dogma. He's not teaching religion. He's teaching the way. Now, if you like this lesson, click on like below. Leave comments and questions below, and I'll answer them and register on the website. Thank you for being with me today. I look forward to seeing you on the next lesson, which if you click on down to the right on channel, it'll take you to the next lesson 5. Thank you and have a good day.